There are jobs you like doing in the whole of the school life, and there are jobs that you just think, oh God, got to be done, but they are not particularly nice jobs to have to do. I have to say invigilation is probably one of those.
Welcome to Exam Time Tips, with practical help for all those exam time pressures.
Invigilation is very boring.
But just occasionally things can go wrong.
We've had people faint.
Sometimes we've had police, we've had fire engines, we've had motorbikes racing up and down.
Just keeping them on task and making sure that they weren't panicking, because I could see some of them were a bit...
We've got some time-saving tips from a group of experienced teachers, as well as some solid advice from exam expert George Turnbull.
You are there to make sure the students have a quiet and comfortable environment so that they can sit the examination in the best atmosphere that is possible.
Everything you need to know to prepare yourself and your students before, during and after exam time.
I really do hesitate to give advice to teachers as to what they should do because they know their own students. But in general terms, cramming is obviously not a good idea. They should be consolidating, I think, examination technique, perhaps looking at some past questions and taking the opportunity for the students to ask the questions about how do you do this, how do you do that, or I'm confused by this. But I think the way the students use the time is the most important factor. All they see is the number of examinations they've got ahead of them and they just worry.
Pupils, sometimes you wouldn't even expect that they would actually express those levels of stress, who had been very calm, hard-working, diligent students up until that time, who suddenly began to lose it, probably.
Biggest problem students have is time management. And what I say to them is there's something called the 10-minute rule. Go to the room for 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, work. Don't do anything else. Don't make a phone call. Don't text anybody. Don't play with a cat. Don't look out the window. But work in the 10 minutes. Have a break for 10 minutes and then go back for 10 minutes. Have another break, back for 10 minutes. Increase the working times into 20, 30 minutes, keeping the breaks to 10 minutes or less. But the thing is that in the time that you're working, and in the time that you're relaxing, you relax. The two don't mix.
Always make sure that your students are fully prepared for the exams. They know when the exams are, how long they last for, and exactly what's going to be in the paper.
You might remind your students about examination technique. If they've only got 10 minutes left in the examination because they haven't kept completely to time, and it's a 30-minute question they're going to attempt, don't do it as if it is a question that you've got 30 minutes to complete. If it's an essay, then get them to jot down the points of the argument that they would make. And if it's mathematics or science, jot down the formula that they would use, and they'll get more marks that way in 10 minutes than they would if they approached the question as though they had the full 30 minutes.
The night before I had to do the French oral exams, I'd been with these students for 2 years, and it's just, they have one chance once you press record on that tape replay. That's when they have to, do themselves justice. So it was certainly for me the night before that day, when I had the whole day with these students, I certainly couldn't sleep myself. So it's not just pressure for the students, it's also pressure for the teachers.
For some schools, it's really just important to get the pupils into the exam.
If pupils don't turn up for the exam, we actually go and collect them.
We went to one girl's house and it was first thing in the morning and she was still in pyjamas.
She was in bed. Her father then shouted up the stairs to her, get dressed.
But I need to do my makeup. I said, you get in the car now.
And it was a great crisis for Louise because it was the first time she'd ever had to appear in public at school without her makeup on.
We got there just 10 minutes after the exam had started, so we secured 2 grades.
I think that makes a difference of probably about 30 GCSE passes over the last summer. So it is a really important part of what we do.
Of course, there are pages and pages of regulations, and you should have some training before you ever invigilate an examination. You need to make sure that there's some seating outside the exam room, the notices are in place. You need to make sure that there's a board which has got the centre number and the name of the school, etc. And you need to make sure that there's a clock in the exam room and it's working. So these are all the major things that need to be done. And there are rules that need to be obeyed, both by the invigilator and the school and the students.
A bit worried that I would do something wrong and that the kids would end up in the wrong place, or that I would be in somebody else's way, or give them something they weren't supposed to have, or not give them something they were supposed to have.
You should be in the examination room at least half an hour before it starts. When the students come in, of course, they're probably going to be as high as kites in some in some cases. So you need to settle them down and you need to get them seated. You need to get the examination papers out eventually. You need to remind them of the rules, what they can do, what they can't do. They will already have seen these rules before. And you need to give them the opportunity, if they've got mobile phones or calculators where they shouldn't have them, there's an opportunity for them to hand them over.
Nowadays in exams, we have a mobile phone detector.
It has this really annoying, very loud voice that says mobile phone on, and you actually know that there's a mobile phone that's come into that exam hall.
What we do find is that when it goes off before exam begins, most often it's teachers with their phones in their pockets. They have to remember to turn them off as well.
But it is very, very important. We have to follow the rule of the law, and we have to make sure that we follow the examination code effectively.
It's not the first time a mother's phoned before the examination has finished to see how her son or daughter has got on, and it ends up with that child being disqualified because they shouldn't have it in the room at all. So just in the few minutes before the examination, that's when you sort of read the last rites, if you like, for the students, in a sense.
So you get the students into the hall, the pupils are sitting down, and what you have to do is, regardless of what you think of that exam paper, it might be the worst paper you've ever seen in all your born days, but you're not going to convey that to the pupils.
Don't forget I told you to do this, and I said to do that, and that's will be in the exam, I told you that, because it worries the pupils.
Did you do that bit? Will they remember it? It doesn't matter. The impression you have to give is you can do this.
Invigilation is a very important aspect of the examination. The main thing the invigilator has got to do is to make sure that no one is doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And the behaviour of the invigilator in the examination room is important too, because you don't want to be disturbing the students.
Pupils are concentrating, obviously, in that situation, and it's important that members of staff understand that how they behave and how they dress in the room is also very important. Walking up and down the aisles in clippity-cloppity shoes is not a good idea.
A couple of the kids have said to me, "Oh, I don't like it when you walk past me, it puts me off." And I think they do feel that, you're walking past, staring at them, looking at what they're doing, which I can see would be a bit off-putting, but then I guess you have to.
Occasionally, there may seem to be something wrong with paper. For example, the question may refer to diagram 1, and there isn't a diagram 1. Now, you can't take any action other than informing the exams officer through the telephone that you're allowed to have in the room, and they need to relate that information back to the examining board to get advice. Under no circumstances should you give any instructions.
Probably 5 or 6 years ago, when we were actually in the exam itself, and we handed out the exam resources, which included a satellite imagery photograph, when we suddenly realised that one of the students was totally colourblind and, of course, was unable to do the question. So there was a big panic about that, and we had to inform the exam board.
They need to sit the examination across the country in the same way. Everybody needs to have the same information, and you may be giving wrong information, so it needs to be confirmed by the examining board what action to take before any action is taken.
I did have a student this year who asked me, have I done this right? And when I said, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to tell you if you've done that right. There was a slight pause, and then she said to me, well, can you tell me if I've done it wrong then?
The rules are quite clear that if anybody asks a question to do with examination, you're not at liberty to put forward an answer at all. If they think there's an error on the paper, then that needs to be related back to the examining board, and the examining board will tell you what action to take, if in fact there is an error, but you're not allowed to give any advice at all.
99 times out of 100, everything goes according to plan, but just occasionally things can go wrong. Sometimes the fire alarm might go off, and you've got these huge, great sirens going off in the exam hall.
Staff and students are looking around wondering what to do. We've got 20 minutes of an hour and a half exam left, and do we evacuate or don't we?
So what do you do in these circumstances? Well, you observe the safety rules of the school and make sure the students are safe, of course, but you also preserve the integrity of the examination papers, so you make sure that they are not disturbed, that they're left there, that students are prevented from speaking to each other about the examination as far as that is possible, and you clear the room in accordance with safety instructions so that the students are safe. And of course, they get the time to sit the examination paper that they are allowed, and of course you can report that back to the examining board as a disturbance, and that may be taken into consideration when the marking is actually being done.
I was once in a situation where I was in an exam hall and a girl had an epileptic fit. It was very clear that she'd gone out quite cold and we needed an ambulance to help her. And we also made a phone call to the exam board to explain that this extraordinary situation had arisen.
In the testing situation, you need to stop the clock, attend to what it is, and then start the clock again when that student is ready to continue.
Occasionally a child may need, believe it or not, a tissue, a glass of water, their pen runs out. To them, it's a really serious thing.
I have seen one where walking round in the exam I could hear a faint sobbing from somewhere in the hall, and it took me a couple of minutes to track it down, and I found a girl sitting there with just big tears dropping onto the examination paper, and we had to remove her to another location, invigilate her separately, talk to her, get her to pull herself together, and in the end she successfully completed the exam and got a decent grade.
You may have to take a student out and to settle them down somewhere else perhaps, and if that is the case then they can get the full time for the test as before, and you just stop the clock when they feel unwell or whatever and then start it again.
The English exam was quite boring because there's not a lot you can do. Once they've read the question, they know what they're doing, they sit and they write for 50 minutes.
Despite how boring it is, you've got to stay awake, you've got to stay alert.
And then, of course, you've got the kid who is obviously cheating, but you can't prove it. You've got to like stand really close and wait until you actually see them lean over.
I think the signs of cheating are always fairly obvious, because if somebody's trying to do something that they shouldn't be doing, they tend to look at the person that's policing the examination, the invigilator. So if you find somebody looking at you continuously through the examination, I think that's an area to watch.
We have had students in the past who've referred to notes in their pocket. We have had people who've had a calculator on their watch that they've used, and you do have to be alert.
If you do spot it out, you need to report that to the head of centre or your examinations officer, and that will be sent back to the examining board. I wouldn't necessarily stop the examination or stop that student from continuing with the examination, because after the event, you know, it may be you've made a mistake and you want to make sure that that student can complete the examination paper so that it can be marked and the situation can be taken into account later on. Finishing the examination is as important as starting the examination, because you need to make sure that the scripts have been completed with the information on the front, with the name of the student, their candidate number and the centre number, and you need to make sure you get every script. And to make sure that if there are any additional sheets of paper have been used, that they are with a treasury tag attached to the original script. And again, they need to have the name and the candidate number, etc. on that, because there are millions and millions of scripts go back to examining boards.
We have one member of staff who sees it as a military manoeuvre. He stands each row up, row by row, and gets them to stand to the right en masse in one go. He then gets them to turn 180 degrees to their left, and then he marches them out one by one. They find it hilarious, and if any pupil steps out of line, the whole row has to sit back down again, and he really does do that.